Can before I start, can I ask what in terms of time, what do people usually do? I
We
can,
usually do this for about an hour.
okay. And like you mentioned, I noted that Megan wanted to have some time as well. I think what I have to say is about 20 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes.
Sure, that'd
Um,
be great.
and that'll leave time for Megan and time for questions.
Yes,
So
thank you.
yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. Good to be with you. I assume people will continue to drop in. Um, and so I'll just begin, if I could, by saying I want to be very clear about what I'm representing and not representing right now. So I do serve in the state Senate from Chittenden County. And as part of that work, I was the chair of education overseeing K through 12 and also higher ed. I've now moved to the Appropriations Committee, where I also have the higher ed portfolio. So I do that work. In my other life, I've been a 28-year veteran in the English department at the University of Vermont. And if I could, I'd like to speak from that perspective tonight. So somebody who teaches in the College of Arts and Sciences and has taught there for a long time and sees maybe trends over history. So with that said, I just wanted to start with, as an answer to the question, what's going on at UVM, let me just start with what's not going on at UVM. So another thing that I do through the state Senate is I'm sitting on something called the Select Committee on Public Higher Education in Vermont. And that was a committee put together to deal with the future of the state colleges.
Mm,
And if you've read the news about the state colleges, you know that their financial situation has been and continues to be pretty dire. So they were looking at closing half of their campuses and not being able to make payroll. So
wow.
that is an existential financial crisis. The difference between being open for business and being closed for business. That is not going on at UVM. UVM is in relatively strong financial shape. Um, and if I could, I'd like to quote from a piece that my colleague Helen Scott wrote. And Helen Scott titled the piece, "The Struggle for the Soul of the University of Vermont."
Mm,
And in the
mhm.
course of that, she talks about where the university is financially. And she says, quote, "This is not a budget crisis, but a values crisis. Far from being in a state of financial exigency, the university as a whole is remarkably well off. The 2020 year-end financial report showed a net increase of 24 million. There's an untapped $34 million rainy day fund and an endowment of more than $500 million. And what I would add to that is that the last few capital campaigns have been remarkably successful, and they have been record breaking, the last two, drawing in hundreds of millions of dollars. So my point is that UVM is in an extremely solid financial position, and all of the worst case scenarios about the pandemic aside, it can't argue that it's facing a financial crisis that would really merit radical shifts in the mission of the university. Except, of course, that's exactly what the university is arguing. So I'm just going to pause and note that there will probably be a response to this talk by Enrique Cordera in about 3 days in the commentary section of Vermont Digger. You can check my accuracy in a couple of days, but I would imagine that um, they will disagree and say that in fact their financial situation is precarious. With that noted, let me just talk about what I see going on from where I sit in the College of Arts and Sciences. Um, I think that what we're seeing at UVM is a relatively obvious, methodical attempt to shift the basic mission and character of the university. And I think it's not coincidental that the major shifts have happened during moments of national emergency. What is that shift? It's a really dramatic movement away from the arts and humanities
Mm,
and toward an ever increasing emphasis on science, technology, and medicine. And if you think about it, that's an identity much more in line with institutions like MIT or Purdue. So here's the historical pattern I see. So I would ask you to cast your memories back to 2007, 2008, 2009, what we now call the Great Recession. So the Great Recession hit, there was the bursting of the housing bubble, and there was a truly frightening global financial crisis. We can argue about what caused it, or whether it was exclusively greed in certain quarters of the US system, or whether there were other substantial causes. But that was a fact of life. And the university was impacted dramatically. Coming out of that, part of the solution or part of the shift in emphasis after the global recession was the creation of what was then called spires of excellence. Now,
mm,
um, we joked a lot in the English department at the time about the spires of excellence because it seems to suggest that everything outside the spire is sort of the valley of mediocrity. Um, and so we had a lot of fun with it, but we were also worried and anxious because what the spires of excellence was an overt statement by the university that they were going to select certain areas for growth and substantial investment. And there was what I think purported to be a town hall um, forum to settle on these spires of excellence, but they pretty much turned out to be what everyone knew they were going to be, and that was neuroscience, complex systems, and food systems. And at about the same time, environmental science was also elevated in terms of the resources it was getting. So our worry was that we would be at first frozen in terms of hiring and resources, but that eventually they would not be, they being general administration, would not be happy simply with freezing, but would rather start to cut our budgets in,
mm.
in the other areas in the arts and sciences. And so if you come up to the present day, you have the pandemic in 2020. And in the midst of that, the announcement that College of Arts and Sciences was going to phase out 12 majors, 11 minors,
Wow.
4 master's programs, and that's fully 1/5 of the college's offerings. And the departments of classics, religion, and geology would be axed entirely.
Mm,
So those two things, when I look at them, define the last 12 years for me. And they show you that there's a consistent trend and it gets dramatic and accelerated when there's a national moment of um, financial crisis. And usually the explanation is either explicitly or implicitly that the financial crisis is driving these particular changes. Um, but it gets more complicated than that and more, I will use the word surreal, because there's, in the arts and sciences, there's a little bit of a feeling of Alice in Wonderland to all of this. Um, but this movement away from the humanities and towards the STEM disciplines is the constant. And what's surreal about it is that the College of Arts and Sciences has long been, since I got here and until the present day, one of the cash cows of the
yeah.
university.
Mm,
In other words, it produces a good deal more revenue than it gets or is allowed to keep from the university. And it has more than its share of majors. Um, and I think that's generally understood. And even the administration will admit that, but they admit it in a certain curious way. But to prove that everybody knows this, I want to read you just a little bit from the Burlington Free Press. Um, the Burlington Free Press is not always the most biting in its analysis, but they published a great article in 2014 when the STEM complex was announced. It was going to be the largest capital investment in UVM history, and it was going to completely devote itself to the teaching of the STEM disciplines. And
Mm.
this is the way the Free Press covered it. Quote, the big investment the University of Vermont is planning for its STEM initiative belies the relatively small numbers of graduates from certain science, technology, engineering, and math programs. The capital investment is expected to amount to over 100 million, the university's largest to date, covering a massive new building and an adjacent major renovation on the central campus. The new complex will accommodate fields in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Here's the key part. The graduates who received bachelor's degree in UVM's designated STEM disciplines this year amounted to about 9% of the graduating class. A review of UVM statistics for the last decade shows that STEM majors comprised fewer than 10% in every year but one. They go on to say the modest number of graduates do nothing to diminish the enthusiasm of Provost David Rosowski, the prime mover of the STEM initiative within the UVM administration. And Rosowski went on to call it a strategic imperative for the university. So you see what I'm talking about there.
Mm.
This is the largest investment in UVM history. It's going to a tiny percentage of UVM majors, but the reason they're doing that, and in the same article, they point out that what they wanted to do was try to grow those majors by 50%. If they did that, then we'd be talking about 18% of graduates. But again, that's a speculation. But that's a pattern too, where science or technology or medicine are concerned, very small numbers of majors or graduates or insufficient revenues to cover operating expenses are all forgiven by the upper administration. And I'll give you one very dramatic example of this. And this is from a 7 Days article published recently. And the analysis was actually performed by Joe Kudrell, a senior lecturer in the math department. And he analyzed UVM's financials and found out that over the last 5 years, the College of Arts and Sciences contributed 88 million to the $200 million pool and received only 54 million in return.
Wow.
So in other words, Arts and Sciences has $34 million taken away from it and then is declared to be in budget structural deficit. And this again from the article. By contrast, Larner College of Medicine, which generated slightly more than 5 million in undergraduate revenue, took in 67 million. So they were the recipients over 5 years of $62 million more than they took in. Now, my dean in the College of Arts and Sciences is a wonderful guy. He's a very intelligent guy, but in every article you will read about this situation, he says things that don't make sense. And to me, that's an example of someone who is being uncomfortably managed from above. And I apologize to Bill if he doesn't agree with that, but that's what it seems like to me. Dean Falls acknowledges in that same article that the College of Arts and Sciences contributes more than it receives. But what he says about that, completely ironically, is that UVM needs this budget model because it allows it to support different priorities at different times. And he goes on to say, well, I guess someone could decide that the College of Arts and Sciences don't need to make any changes, and we're just going to take money away from the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources, but they've got to balance their budget, and that would mean they have to make cuts. But the point, as I see it, is their logic is that departments should be cut according to their ability to produce revenue. But instead, what we're seeing are what I call Cheshire Cat cuts, where even though we're generating tens of millions more than we get, we are declared, arts and sciences that is, to be in structural deficit. And then people, in order to make up for that, are being cut. They're not being cut at the Larner College. They're not being cut at the Rubenstein School. They're being cut in the area of the university where we're making tens of millions. Now, you can call that governance by whim if you want to be unkind, or by strategy if you want to be kind. But no matter what you call it, what we're saying is that the management at the top has decided on an outcome that's not based on the dollars, really. It's based on preference in the strategic direction that they've selected. So, in effect, what we're doing now is cutting areas of the college that make money. And then we're using those proceeds to try to grow disciplines that only might make money. Now, that's what you might call a roll of the dice. And that's exactly what Bill Falls described it to us in a department meeting we had with him. Now, I won't go on much longer, but I want to funnel this down to what that means. What it means is that you remember I said that during the Spires of Excellence days, we were frozen in terms of hiring and our resources were inhibited. Now we're at the point where arts and sciences is being told we're going to be cut and we're going to be cut year after year. And what that translates into, I work with a guy named Jamie Williamson.
Yeah.
Jamie has well more than 3 decades in university. He was 4 years from retirement, and his contract came up for renewal during the pandemic, and he was let go the month before Christmas by the administration. And when he tried to plead with them or negotiate with them, they said this is purely a financial matter. Now, I would suggest to you that that's absolutely up is downism. It is not a financial matter that Jamie Williamson was cut. His classes are always full, and the division in which he sits or the department in which he sits generates money, as does the college. So the university has decided to subsidize other programs at the expense of our college, with the impact on people like Jamie Williamson. Um, and the last thing I'll say there is that Jamie teaches subjects that are understood by the university to be um, absolutely necessary. Among other things, he teaches Native American literature. No one else we have is qualified. Robert, could you mute? There you go. So no one else is qualified to teach Native American literature. So we're losing something that's key to our race and ethnicity requirements. We're losing a valued colleague 4 years from retirement, and the savings are non-existent because Jamie's courses are all full. The only way that you can get to possible savings would be to say that by cutting people whose courses are full, we would then drive students toward courses they don't want to take. In other words, courses that are not already full. So with that said, I will finish by repeating something I said at the beginning. These are my observations as someone who works in the College of Arts and Sciences. I believe that what I said is accurate based on the facts of the last 12 or even 20 years. But where I sit in the state Senate is not to try to drive decisions based on this, but rather to go at it more objectively and to think about the needs of the university as a whole. So among other things, we're now considering a $98 million request from the university in terms of pandemic response. The legislature was very quick to fund UVM and the state college's needs last time out, as well as independent colleges. We will be equally quick this time around, and that money is forthcoming no matter what the strategies under discussion tonight. But I'm delighted to have the opportunity, and thank you for providing it, to be able to get this off my chest. Our division, our department, our college has been under siege, and colleagues of mine have been under siege. In addition to Jamie Williamson, I just want to mention Nancy Welch, my colleague who was called into a mandatory meeting with Dean Falls to protest her activism on this subject.
Wow.
Something I regard as completely and utterly covered by free speech and academic freedom. So with that said, I'm happy to, I know Megan had some comments she wanted to make,
Right.
and people may have questions, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, Megan, where are you? Megan?
I'm right here, Sandy. Well, I just wanted to say that it's hard to follow up and add more to what Senator Baruth has said. He's covered it very well. I think something that I might bring in is that the sciences that are being invested in are applied more than the basic
Mm,
sciences. And I think it's important to draw the distinction because basic sciences have a very different approach. They ask very different questions when they're doing their research. You know, asking a question uh, based on a problem. So if we were to think about, you know, going to you know, have more nuclear power plants, right? What would the impact of an increased number of nuclear power plants be, right, on our planet with regard to just, you know, getting rid of the waste and you know, all the different aspects of that very complex problem, or the benefits with regard to less carbon dioxide being emitted into our atmosphere. And it would be a much more open, broad kind of investigation. Whereas applied science is often tied to grants offered by
mm,
industry, sometimes the federal government, as is basic science. But the industry grants have many more strings attached. And I think that the key term is something I saw in an article that a former alum sent to me. And he's now working in Europe for an incredible firm. I believe it's in the Netherlands, um, looking for solutions to these environmental issues that we're going to have to seriously work on very quickly here. Was
yeah,
solutions-based
yeah.
research, right? Where you don't investigate problems, you seek solutions when it is driven by industry. And that's a very different process, right? And that is a way for industry to guide research away from problems that they don't want to have light shed on, right? So when we see the fossil fuel industry, you know, fueling research, right, you can be
Hmm.
sure, right, that they're going to steer that research because of the dollars that are attached to those initiatives away from the problems that might, you know, issue come out of these industries. You know, and this is a very old problem. This is nothing new. We saw it with the tobacco industry, right? I mean, this is nothing new. So we have to be very, very careful. Now, there are ways for faculty senates to, you know, be provided overview and be given, you know, some kind of direct oversight of that process in determining whether or not the research projects are that they serve, right? They serve the common good, that they are not simply driven for the selfish interests of the industry. However, we don't have those safeguards in place at the University of Vermont. And that's something I learned from colleagues, that at least they're not robust enough. And so it's something that we have to be very mindful of. And another thing with regard to science, I have a student who's a double major. I'm a professor in the Romance Languages and Cultures department. I teach French. He's a double major in French and in physics. All right, get that. Think about how bright this young man is. I would say probably two of the most difficult areas, foreign language and physics. And I feel for him. And this entire semester, he has seemed down. And I learned perhaps why. I learned last week that one of 5 remaining faculty in our physics department has taken a job at Oklahoma, that she was
Mm.
recruited today. And she, our one woman physicist, and you can count them probably on 2 hands if you look through this country, was recruited away from UVM. And why is that? Just like Major Jackson and others, I'm sure, are receiving calls because our administration broadcast loud and wide, we're cutting the arts and sciences because it is a failing college, right? I'm paraphrasing, but that is the message that came out loud and clearly. It's a false message. I want to make that very clear. And Senator Baruth has made that clear. We are bringing in much more money than we cost to the university. And so I, learned about the fact that her name is Madalena Furis, and she is a wonderful colleague, a very active faculty member, and an award-winning physicist. And I brought that fact into my remarks that I made at the press conference that the group UVM United Against the Cuts, and Nancy Welch is in that group, as is Peter Spitzform. I'm looking at the names here, probably more people. And I think students listened to that press conference. I saw him in class Tuesday, and all of a sudden, it was like, I have been heard, because he is probably sensing that his investment, right? These students spend a lot of money to get a college education, and his investment, he is also, someone who thought he was going to be studying in Europe this year. COVID hit, those plans went out. He was looking for a university where he could study physics and French, right? Overseas. So you can just imagine what this is for this young man, right? 20 years old, so bright, so promising, and to see, not only his plans to go abroad and to study abroad, just slip away and never come back, because of course COVID has lasted a lot longer than the 3 months initially estimated. But that his program, he sees it slipping away. And so when he came into class on Tuesday, I could just see in his eyes, he looked at me, and he had that light again in his eyes, like, you have heard me. You have heard what is happening to me. And he had never been talkative in the entire semester, and he was just bubbling on Tuesday, bubbling. And I think that that's something that whoever's listening in, and who will listen in, and who will be submitting perhaps letters to 7 days to refute what Senator Baruth and perhaps I and others will say, they have to pay attention that this is having a direct impact on our students. Because when they see their faculty being whisked away, they see their plans, they see the quality of their diplomas whisked away. And I can't stress it enough. So of course, physics is a problem-based science, right? And Garamella wants us to be a Carnegie Research One institution. Well, how can you do that without physics, right? How can you do that without geology and their master's program that they say, well, let's do a PhD. And very interesting, Paul Bierman, my colleague in geology, our colleague in geology, he says they don't seem to understand that the master's degree is the terminal degree in geology. So we see these administrators being paid big bucks who don't even understand anything that is most basic to what kinds of questions should go into a restructuring plan or a vision for being a Research One institution. Another story Paul shared with me, and I'll share it, I think that he doesn't mind. These cuts were just announced out of the blue. And the director of the National Science Foundation in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, called up our vice president of research and said, what is going on? What are you doing to geology? This is the model program for the country. The model program for the country. And the VP said, we're cutting geology? I didn't even know. What kind of planning None.
I definitely don't have COVID. My nose works better than anyone else's, evidently. Wow.
I hear you, Barbara. I hear you, Barbara, and your granddaughter probably.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And it's something that the public needs to know. These people are making a piece, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars to steer our institution to a better place. I'm a French professor. I never thought I'd make hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I don't. Right? If I get to $100,000 at the end of my career, that might happen. We'll see. We'll see if my program is still here. And how can I be more aware of these issues? It's because I'm close to these issues. And I thought that was a really interesting question that was raised during the press conference, and that Julie Roberts, who's here, she responded, and I would hope you call on her, Sandy.
Sure.
Question about having a co-op kind of organization for our University of Vermont, meaning that there is no, top administration.
Hierarchy.
Exactly. That it is the faculty who
Right.
are leading the institution, and this kind of institution exists. I think it's in Montana, right? And I met someone. It works very well. There are no deans. There's no president, right? It is the faculty who is leading, right? And it's something for us to consider, because this is a small state, and we, as I've heard people say, in all kinds of industries, we punch above our weight, right? I like to say we're the little engine that could. The state is amazing for what we do.
Right. Well, yeah.
And
I just wanted to say,
Sure.
Megan, that model of a co-op is something that I would love to see. I would love to see an organization, an institute, and that's why I'm frankly doing these kinds of things, these Zoom meetings. I would love to see higher ed cooperatives. That's how Burlington College actually started 105 years ago, probably. And of course that collapsed, but it collapsed also because of overspending by the administration, overspending, buying all that land. That's why it collapsed. It was a sustainable model. But anyway, there's a lot of questions, Beth, but, and I wonder, Beth, if you can get into the chat, because I don't really know how to do that. But you suggested also, Megan, that somebody that you knew, you wanted to have that person question. Julie
Roberts, who's the president of United Academics. Yeah, she just turned on her.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been sitting here trying to figure out what I could possibly add to what my two colleagues have already said, because they did a wonderful job. What I would like to add, I think, is that one thing that United Academics would like to see, and it's a baby step to get to what Megan was talking about in terms of a cooperative governance model. But we would like to see faculty members and staff members on the board of trustees. You would think that little suggestion was a bombshell. I mean, it is just so unpopular with the present board and with the administration, who feel, I mean, I don't think it's too strong to say that the people who run the university should not exactly be fraternizing with the people who are employed by the university, even though the president does sit on the board of trustees as an ex officio member. So I think there's going to be a lot of resistance, which is fine. We've been working against resistance for a while now, and I think we are making headway, as even evidenced by the fact that you asked Senator Baruth here today to speak about what's going on at UVM. So, and I thank you for doing that. Part of this struggle here, I think, is just to get the word out, because people just don't believe what's going on there. And we've touched on a few things. Another piece, and I'll try to say it very quickly, is a huge reorganization of the university that's been proposed, that's besides, in addition to what we've already talked about in terms of closing down departments and programs. This reorganization is one that, if it goes through, will be pretty well, at least in the beginning, it was completely administratively led. There was no faculty input whatsoever. There are now a couple of working groups that have a couple of faculty members on them because the protest was so huge against the first go round. And so now there are a few faculty members on a couple of the working groups, but still the whole thing is being done in secret. They are not putting out information about what's going on, about what this reorganization might mean. It is, I think, if I had to characterize our administration in one, in a single phrase or word, it would be completely unilateral. They're and uncollaborative and uncommunicative.
Right.
I think Senator Bruce is right that Enrique Cordero will come out with a commentary, but that's as close as you'll get to any communication from the administration.
So
Well, but
let's-
that communication to citizens really has to happen. All of this, all of what you're saying has to be communicated to citizens, because the citizens of the state are really interested in UVM and want to keep it a real university. Okay, anyway, I think Beth, there are questions you
Yeah.
want to.
Mostly, a lot of it is Megan and Nancy. So are there other questions that didn't get answered? There's the last one, I think, from Janet. What's the status of the bill in the legislature regarding the faculty and staff representation on the board of trustees?
Janet, is that Janet Watley that you're talking about?
No, it's another Janet.
Okay,
Janet N.
Yep.
I can answer that if,
okay, yeah.
okay.
Go ahead.
So, the world seems divided into pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, or wherever we are now. But if you remember back before the pandemic, we were doing pretty much business as usual in the legislature. Among the other bills that came to me then when I was chairing Senate Education was a bill to reshape the Board of Trustees around gender parity. So it's wildly overly represented by men at this point, whereas the Board of Trustees for the state colleges is right at parity between men and women. So we started working on that. As it moved through the Senate, it changed. We added a racial diversity component. And the idea was that the university needed to develop a plan, and they would have to report results every year when they came for their budget discussions. And we passed it out of the Senate. It went over to the House, and then COVID hit about a week later, and we all moved out of the State House and have never moved back yet.
Oh,
So
God.
that and every other bill that we sent to the House died. But I have been talking with Julie and others about reanimating that bill and seeing if there isn't a way to address the representation of faculty and staff as well. Problem being, I no longer chair that committee and I don't sit on it. So I can't, it's a much more indirect process for me to try to move it now. But I think it probably can't be done this year because we've already gone past our crossover deadline. But a bill could go in January, and then see if we can get it forward from that point.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
Nancy, you have another question you want to ask?
Yes, I have two quick comments and then a question. So one comment is I put in the chat the link to the no confidence in the leadership of President Garamella petition. And I encourage people to sign it, or well, read it. And then if you are inclined, sign it, share it broadly. I I also wanted to note that while the College of Arts and Sciences is being hardest hit right now in this austerity restructuring, other colleges are also under pressure. So the College of Education and Social Services dean announced the cancellation of the early childhood special education major, despite a critical shortage of special educators in Vermont and nationwide. And also in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, plant and soil science, I believe it is, was threatened with cancellation because of low enrollments in their two majors of agroecology and sustainable landscape horticulture. And so they're trying to save themselves by combining those two majors into one major, agroecology and landscaping. And with that change from sustainable landscape horticulture to landscaping, you see that kind of move at UVM towards only wanting to value what is like immediately applied, turning us into a job training and tech institute. So I just wanted to signal that, but I also wanted to ask Philip what it is that we can do to
Yeah.
really and motivate our legislative trustees to rock this boat. Historically, the legislative trustees have told us that they feel like they have a backseat to the corporate self-perpetuating trustees, that they don't really have a voice, but they're also responding to people writing to them by saying, well, we trust the administration. So how do we reach our legislative trustees and how do we get them to act and to educate themselves about, about what is completely manufactured with the budget deficit, what UVM's resources really are, and how they're being drained out of education for for future Vermont students.
Well,
Go ahead.
couple of things. So first of all, we just had an election and elected 3 new trustees, legislative trustees, and I spoke with all of the candidates, and I supported people who I discussed this situation with them, and people who said that they would take a pointed and questioning air into these discussions. So the new people, I think, are aware of it, and I'm hoping that they will be as good as their word and ask the right questions. The other thing I would say is that over the years, I have found the legislative trustees to be the only ones that I contact and get a response from. The others tend to be out of state. For a long time, when there was a scandal going on at UVM that I was very concerned about, I tried to contact all the trustees and found out that they had a single email address that they encouraged you to use, and that went into a box that was never checked. So they changed that as a result of my insistence. But with that said, I think the legislative trustees are the most responsive of any that you'll get. So to Nancy's real question, which is what can you do? I have tried for years to convince the legislative trustees to make use of minority reports. So the way it tends to work is packages come out of the finance committee. All of the major decisions are made in the finance committee. Then they come out to the trustees. There's a kind of, I would say, ethic of collegiality / groupthink, where you should go along. You should be a supportive trustee because we're all in this together. And what I would like to see is one or more trustees develop a tradition of a minority report where they point out that they did not vote for X package, and these are the reasons why, and make that a transparent part of what the trustees need to report. So the way it stands now, we get a sort of single sanitized version of the deliberations of the board because everybody sort of folds their opinions under the majority opinion. But if you've ever sat on any kind of study committee legislative committee, blue ribbon panel, you know that it's not uncommon at the end for there to be a report and a minority report. And I think that would begin
Mhm.
the process of the majority needing to work and negotiate with the minority on the board. And again, if we can change up the primarily white male composition of the board, I think that will help in terms of this sort of reapportioning of where the voice lies.
Robert,
Any,
you were
go
asking
ahead.
me questions, Robert. Did you, and you said you got your answer. Did you want to say anything else? From Robert Bristow?
He's muted, Beth, so.
I can unmute. I asked two questions on the chat. I just thought that maybe people could look at them and maybe respond. I mean, it seems to me, I came from another state that is as small as Vermont in population, yet we had two flagship campuses. There was North Dakota State University in Fargo and University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, and both of them were as big as UVM. I don't know how they sustained the schools financially with a 600,000 population state, but I just don't understand how UVM seems to be so autonomous when it's a public school.
Well, does anybody have an answer to that? Is it truly a public school? Doesn't
It
it
is,
get, isn't it more like a private school than most public universities or not? Does anybody have an answer to that?
it is a land grant university with
Yeah,
a
right.
public mission. That got muddied substantially when they created the UVM Foundation to do the fundraising. So
And when was that?
that
when was
was
that?
following the Great Recession. So
In 2008, in 2008, is that right?
I can't give you a direct year, but it would be maybe 2011.
Mhm.
But it was among other things to allow them not to disclose donors
Wow.
to the university, and you know, that really, to my mind, muddies the waters in terms of a public mission,
Right.
because it always comes back to money, and if you have any sort of undisclosed money, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a cancer in the system.
Right. Right. Who else has something? Another question?
If I could add and answer a question that's in the chat. I mean, there is the matter of how much funding UVM gets from the state of Vermont, which
Right.
is
Right.
fairly small. And I think that has to do, if not with the fact of how much control the legislature has, with the attitude about how much the control the legislature should have. I also just wanted to say, in response to something in the chat about comparing VSC and UVM in terms of our issues, that I wanted to assure people that at least at the union level, we are cooperating very much with the VSC. And in fact, the bill that we had introduced about adding faculty and staff trustees came originally from a very similar VSC bill, and they gave us permission to use their language and craft a bill like that for UVM. So we do have a lot of collaboration there between the two units. And I know Senator Baruth has also done a lot of work with both. So.
And by VSC, you mean the Vermont State Colleges, right?
That's
Is
correct.
that right? Yeah.
Sandy,
Okay. Yeah.
Sandy,
Tim?
I have
Yeah.
a question for Philip.
Yeah.
And Julie, isn't UVM an instrumentality of the state?
I don't know. Good to see you, Tim. I don't know if that's the precise term. An instrumentality of the state would be
Right.
more under the direct control.
Right, but I believe that UVM is.
Well-
That's the wording that comes to mind, I don't know from where, but I remember when John Jewett was dean, he said, we have to become more private. We're an instrumentality of the state. We
Well,
have a-
maybe could I address that, Tim, a little bit? I had a legal case against the university when the Board of Trustees once, facing enormous protest closed the door on those protesters and wouldn't let anyone in. And we sued about that. With other attorneys, we sued them. And the decision was that it was an instrumentality of the state. Therefore, it was subject to the sunshine laws,
Mhm.
and that it had to be open to the people who were trying to protest. But basically that was 100 years ago. But I think it is really a really
I
interesting
don't know that
question.
that has ever been rescinded or reworded.
Well, I think Senator Bruce is saying that it has been sort of, right? Senator Bruce.
Well,
or not.
I would have to look in Title 16 and see what the exact relationship is. I know that we have oversight power in terms of the budget that goes to UVM, and I know that we have a long history of overseeing the university and writing policy in which it is to function. My question is just whether an instrumentality, I think of more something like a school district,
Yeah,
but it's whatever the semantic term is. The state has a certain amount of control, but not obviously direct control.
Or- yeah,
And
that
when
is
the UVM Foundation was created, we lost a lot of ability, as did you all, to
Yes.
look at their finances.
correct.
They're
And-
So
complete.
Megan, did you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think that we should not underestimate the influence of the governor and our congressmen and senators in decisions that are made in, top level discussions.
how so, Megan? What do you mean?
Well, I think that the fact that they are often invited to commencement is simply, an indicator that they, our governor regularly speaks at commencement. I graduated, I got my graduate degrees from a state university in Ohio. The governor didn't come to my graduation.
Mhm.
And I know that Senator Leahy has, played a real role in, various initiatives. And so I think that it's important for us to reach out to them and
Yeah.
to express our concerns.
Has
I know
anybody
that
done that?
I'm sorry?
Has anybody done that? We reached out to Senators Leahy and Sanders and Congressman Welch and the governor?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Generally speaking, I can tell you the response from the senators and the congressman's office is that it's interesting to hear about it, but it's not really in their purview. But I still want to second what Megan said. I think that state legislators, present company absolutely accepted, because Senator Bruce is here and is obviously working on these issues, have abdicated a lot of their power. And they tend to invite the administration and their lobbyists in and pretty much not ask questions. I mean, I've spent a lot of time on Zoom this year observing committee meetings and observing the testimony that President Garamella gives at these meetings. And mostly people are just thrilled to have him there. And I'm
Wow.
not saying that they should be throwing him out, but I think they should be asking questions. And that's why I think all letters to legislators are welcome, because they need to know, A, that they can ask questions, and B, enough background so that they can ask learned questions.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Well,
How
for
about
instance,
in the chat? Yeah.
yeah, just the other comment, another question. Why make the cutoff at 5 majors? Let's just think about that for a while. Special education as opposed to K through 12, right? Is it a surprise that there are fewer graduates in special education than K through 12? Honestly? Does that mean that special education is not important? So when we think about how many physicists we have working, right, for our national science foundations, do they compare to the number of engineers working and computer engineers working on building out, Facebook and Instagram and all of these fabulous things that we're all working on now?
Mhm,
No, but does that mean that they're not important?
mhm.
Of course not. And so this arbitrary number of 5 is ridiculous. It goes against any sense that anyone in the academy should have. We are to fill in the cracks, aren't we? And that those crack filling, I like to call it canary in the mine. I mean, that's what we do. We prepare not only those basic sciences, but also the humanities specialists who we're going to point to. This is a problem that people aren't paying attention to, right? Our attention's over here at the next flashy thing because it's making a lot of money. But this is a problem. And this could lead to real, something very, very devastating, right? To think about the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. I'll just go back to the environment. So when we think about the number of majors, I want us to ask that question. Is that a reasonable question to ask? The second thing I wanted to say, and I raised this also in my remarks on Monday, and I've also spoken to people in the School of Education and Social Sciences, as well as in the Rubenstein School. We're now, because of our budget model, where students, wherever they are seated, in front of whichever faculty member, if that faculty member is in the College of Arts and Sciences, those revenue, the revenue dollars from tuition go to the College of Arts and Sciences, right? There's an algorithm for it. If that student is in front of a professor who's in the Rubenstein School, those revenue dollars go to Rubenstein, right? So that's our budget. That's our budget model, just boiled down to simple, basic facts. But what it does is it prevents cross-college collaboration.
I think they are. I think that Nancy Welch is on.
Yep.
Somebody
Charlotte,
have to mute.
I think if you could mute, that would be great.
Nancy Welch. She has some.
Jerry, I just need you to sign this.
And so
Charlotte, move.
Oh,
mute yourself.
Sorry.
the
Hello, everybody.
The
Go ahead.
problem here is that we're currently in the process, right? The deans and the faculty of Rubenstein, the dean and the faculty of the College of Arts and Sciences, they are working to separate these programs that have developed that are, collaborative programs between the College of Arts and Sciences and Rubenstein, so that students studying the environment in the College of Arts and Sciences would never take a class counting towards their degree in environmental studies in Rubenstein. Now, does that
Why
make
not?
any sense?
No, none of this makes any sense, especially if the humanities are kind of the cash cow. I honestly don't get it. And I guess I really, what can we do as citizens? Anything?
Yeah, I think you can do
What?
a lot. I think a lot of you are graduates of UVM. I think that you need to speak to your alma mater. You need to tell them, we knew UVM
Wow.
as a different kind of place. You write to the Board of Trustees. You write to the deans. You write to the president. You really need to communicate. And I do think that they are paying attention because, Phil, I just got a receipt for, I don't know, I've sent like 6 letters to the Board of Trustees. I finally got a receipt about, March 12th, March 15th, March 17th, all the way up to March 29th, because our department sent a letter into the board declaring, that we did not approve of what was going on and quite in some detail. And I said, oh, there's a letter missing from January when our department submitted a letter defending the value of Italian studies, which was also one of those programs.
Are you talking about Italian? Is that
Italian
right?
studies, Italian studies, the country that gave us the Renaissance,
Yeah,
Italian
yeah.
studies. Okay. So they're paying attention, I think. And this is the moment for all of you who care, and especially alums, to let your alma mater know what you think about this. I think it's really important. And anybody who cares, even if UVM is not your alma mater, you have contributed to the society. You know the value of the humanities, you know the value of the basic sciences, you know the value of cross-college collaboration. You know this because you've had to work in teams. You've had to think through problems. You've had to ask yourself ethical questions. We have to do that in our daily lives constantly, especially during COVID. You know the value. So we need to teach. That's how I see it. We need to educate the trustees who live out of state, most of them are not academics.
Mhm.
We need to educate them about the importance
Okay,
of this institution for Vermonters and the importance of all the things that are at stake here.
So
Okay, I
there's
think there's a lot of questions in chat. Beth, are you following that?
they're not questions, they're comments. And I think that all of the people who are commenting are, may want to, listen to what Megan's saying about these issues that, the problems with physics, the problems with different things being on the chopping block. There is one question that I wanted to make sure we got in, which was Robin wanted to know about the relationship of Sandia Labs. What's the role of Sandia Labs at UVM? Does anybody have the answer to that?
I don't know.
Not me.
Okay.
No.
Uh,
Okay, go ahead, Robin.
The reason
Robin.
I'm asking the question was I was reading somewhere that a new vice president or something who is a friend of the president, she comes from Sandia Labs, and that's a nuclear organization out west, but now it's here, and I just wondered what they were doing.
Okay, anyone else? I don't know if anybody knows about that, Robin. I'm sorry to say. We should, obviously, as citizens too, we should know about stuff like that. And anyone else? We're approaching 7 o'clock. This is obviously, I believe, a really, really important discussion. I don't know how to even think about what citizens should do. I mean, I agree with you, Megan. We should be trying to educate the trustees. Frankly, I would bet it's pretty hopeless. But I would say that there should be some kind of a citizens group even that would be more like pressuring them not to, pressuring the Board of Trustees not to make these cuts. The humanity, especially to the humanities. It's the only part of the university that attracts people. It's the main attraction of any university. I don't know what to do as a citizen. It's very concerning to me. I'm not an alum at UVM, but I'm an alum of a state university. I went to UMass and Amherst, and I know what those state universities mean to people. They transform people's lives. What are we going to do as citizens to make it perform its mission?
And how are we going to know? I mean, Nancy Welch just wrote a comment about things that are happening, moving part of arts and sciences, I guess, into geography and natural resources. And how will the public be able to know what those things are as they're happening?
I don't know, except for, I've known about it because I know Megan and I know Senator Bruce a little bit, and so I follow what they say. I follow the issues in the newspaper. I just don't know what to do about it as a citizen. I guess I'm asking that question.
Write a letter.
It seems to me.
That's not enough. That's not enough. The only thing I think would be enough is if there was some strong citizens group that would say this is unacceptable and we're not really willing to pay our taxes for this anymore, or something like that.
What are the students saying?
Yeah, and the students, what are the students saying? Anybody have a comment about that?
Sure.
Yeah, Megan.
Yeah, they've been vocal. Of course, now we're in midterm time and they're tired. I mean, these are students who have been, in confinement, wearing masks, right?
Yep.
Dealing with all of the stresses that we have been dealing, and yet they have a full course load, right? Trying to, of course, build their future. So I think they're tired, and I think they rightly so need to focus on their studies right now. That's the message we've gotten. There are several students who have worked with the faculty in UVM United against the cuts. They've been fabulous. They've written commentary for our local journalism. they've been fabulous speakers at press conferences and in our teaching. And so they show exactly who those leaders are that are hopefully going to take us out of the messes that we're in currently. I think you're right, Sandy. I think there needs to be an organization. I think it needs to really think, problem solve. How are we going to get over the barrier, right, that exists between the university decision makers and the public? Because this is a public good. We are teaching to Vermonters. Many of these Vermonters do not have a lot of money. They cannot afford Middlebury. They can't go to UMass Amherst, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is their chance to get that quality education.
Okay, any final questions? Or I think maybe we should do this again fairly soon, if that's all right with people. What about Barbara McGrew is saying what? I mean, I think there has to be a citizen
Thumbs
response.
up. I think we need more organizing on this.
Yeah,
And more discussion. Look at the turnout. It's great.
yeah, thank you. Any other final thoughts? Anyway,
I would just say I had to leave for an important phone call for a while, so I don't know what was said, but I was an organizer for the National Education Association in public schools and higher ed in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And this was starting to happen even then with the overuse of adjuncts, the rise of a managerial class where the tail is wagging the dog here. And someday I'm going to write not just about this, but the issues that progressives have in Burlington with the mayor, with the F-35, with this. I don't think we're organizing properly. I don't think we're analyzing. I don't think we're hard-nosed enough about analyzing power. Who can make the decision to change the situation, and how do you get to that person or those people?
It seems to me it's the government, because this is a state-owned, it's a land grant university, and ultimately it's going to be lying in Montpelier to seize control of this, in my opinion.
Well, as an organizer, I would say, do we know who the major donors are and the ones who are humanities majors? I can't believe you can't get a list of donors to the foundation. If that's not public, then that becomes the issue. I mean, I just don't think we're tough enough. I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
I have an idea.
The right things, and this is true with the mayor and his racism. We do petitions and demonstrations and demands, and with the F-35 too. We don't know who it is that makes the decisions and how they're gotten to. Sort of straight power organizing, and so those are my 2 cents.
Megan had something to say. Megan?
Yes. There are financial records that are available online because we are a public institution, and the UVM United is looking for someone who could do some accounting. That is something that would be very helpful.
What do you mean? Accounting, examination of those records and coming up with.
Specifically, they talk about the budget, that there's a budget shortfall, right? But that doesn't mean that when you look at the financial accounts, and I'm putting them here in the chat, there's the link to them. When you look at the financial accounts and see the statements, meaning the audit, the final audit, is there truly a deficit at the end of the year? That's the question. Not, did we make as much money as we thought we would make this year, right? Because those kinds of questions, they don't tell us very much, as opposed to how much is left over at the end of the year, right? And so you can spin a narrative when you're talking about how much you would like to make, as opposed to, are we truly in the hole? Right?
Yeah.
So if there's an accountant here in the room,
I probably know some.
there you go.
What I would suggest is, perhaps if everybody's agreeable, maybe we should meet like this in another month or so and figure out what we as citizens can do. I don't know. What does everybody think? Barbara's saying yes. I mean, should I try to set something like that up is my question. What do you think, Megan?
Oh, this problem is not going to go away quickly. We have to keep at it. How
about you, Senator Bruce? What do you think?
I think it's a great idea.
All right, so I will try to do that if Beth will set it up, right, Beth Sachs? In the meantime, I can't thank you all enough for talking about, to me, this is an ultimate huge question for young people, especially. I mean, we cannot desert our young people the way that I think has happened, particularly during the pandemic. We have to think about the future that they have to think about more than I do. I mean, but we certainly have to create some kind of a future that they can look forward to, it seems to me. And the university is so crucial to that. So I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. And I will try to arrange something in the immediate future if people want.
And Sandy, I want to thank you for arranging this forum and sticking with it week after week. I'm, more interested in some topics than others, but it's really a tremendous public service.
And next week, by the way, what we're doing is we're going to have the Attorney General, TJ Donovan, speaking about the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. That's the amendment which guarantees against illegal searches and seizures of your property and your body, by the way. So it's kind of critical issue right now. Okay, Robin, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that we'll be sending you, I guess Beth will be doing this, sending you the link to watch this on CCTV. So when you get that, send that to your friends and because I think there's a lot of people who should have been on this call and aren't, and could be very useful for when we do the second time.
And just so everybody knows,
Sandy,
all of our,
I just wanted to thank Philip for doing an
Yeah, thank you, Philip, and Megan, both. What?
incisive presentation of the situation at UVM, Philip. So thank you.
Thanks,
Megan.
Tim. Good to see you.
Also Julie.
also just want to let people know, all of these Wednesday night talks, there's a link to them. We record them all, and there's a link to them. You can watch them on CCTV a few times, but there's a link on the VICII website, which is just vicii.org, to everything that we've recorded. And it's pretty easy to find under events.
So good luck, Megan. Good luck, Phil, and everybody else, and good luck to us in trying to, I guess, change the university. I guess.
In the
All
world.
right, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
See you soon. I
Thank you.
hope.